Something like Louisiana were very late, and all of a sudden it was like an explosion.
Hello, Miss Paula.
Never dreamed of in past centuries. 1917, the pandemic was something ravaged parts of this country, but ravaged Europe, ravaged. They say 75 to 100 million. Some people say 50 to 75 million. People died. Think of that. That was a long time ago, over 100 years ago. The books written about the 1917, 1918 pandemic. Our doctors are poring over the virus, genetic code, designing potential therapies and vaccines. Our planes are airlifting supplies from every corner of the earth. We're watching other countries and they're watching us to see whether or not it's going to be a first to come up with a cure, a remedy of some kind, or even a help. And of course, a vaccine. Vaccine Johnson & Johnson is doing well, and other companies are doing very well. But our most powerful asset, our greatest weapon in this effort, is the spirit of our people. And we want to keep a distance, keep away. If you don't get it, it's always a lot of problems. If you don't get it, keep getting it.
Hey, Elder, can you hear me?
Yes, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, it's so nice to see. Now, I can't see you.
I told you I wasn't going to let you. No, I got to figure out, I'm not savvy as you with the computer.
Girl, I've been on this talking to this computer all day. Somebody else is here. So, who is this?
Portia.
Hi, hey. Portia. How are you?
Well, how are you all?
Good. Hey, Portia.
Hey.
I'm going to try to get me a better background. I don't know what my background doing. I'll put it on none. That'll just be me. Well, we're going to wait a second or two to see who gets on with us.
Oh yeah, it's not 6:30 yet, so we're good.
Okay. And then I'll because I want to see who gets on here. I guess I can still see. Let me see, because I do have some slides. I tried not to do too many because y'all know I get carried away. But God has excited me with this topic. And so I'm kind of excited to share it and share what I've been reading.
Hello.
Hello, who is this?
Who would you like for it to be?
Oh, gosh.
Oh, God. I don't know, and I'm so bad at determining voices. Say hello again.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi.
I know.
Yeah. Let me make sure my Oh, there's Chanel.
Take a minute. I think Zoom is getting overloaded.
Oh, please. Well, I tell you what, if we have as many people as I've heard said they're going to try to join this evening, I think we got a new way of doing Bible study.
Exactly. I was thinking that
instead of it being you and me sitting up in the fellowship hall looking at each other.
Exactly. Well, and I told Andrea, I said, Andrea, I don't know. I said, no, people don't want to come and look at me. They want to talk to other people. I said, they can't just come and look at me. So we got to do something. So, and then the next couple of days after that, then all of this stuff hit. And we were like, oh gosh, we really got to think about it. And then they told me they were doing this. And so, oh yeah, I can do that. That I can do.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi,
Hey.
Mildred Powell. Yeah.
Hello.
Oh, hey, Mildred.
Hi, good
Hello,
to see
everyone.
you.
How are
Hello.
you?
Doing well, thanks. Hope you are. Hope you've all had a
Yes.
good day.
Yeah. I finally got my lawn cut out here, so I'm happy.
All right.
Yep.
Right.
Well, we're gonna, let's see. Let me turn off Donald Trump.
Oh,
Oh, please.
and is he not making the most of his daily pep rallies?
Oh Lord, yeah. Now you can't. Now I don't think he's the best president, but I'm gonna tell you, can't nobody beat him on using the social media.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he took what Barack Obama did with social media and refined it.
Yeah.
He just didn't use his talents for good. Oh, we're recording, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Are we recording? We are a nonpartisan organization.
That's right.
Let me say that. We are nonpartisan. Okay. All right. I'm going to start on time, and I'm going to end on time. We're going to end at 7:30 so that we can be attentive to everyone's time. I'm so thankful that you are here. In this time of the coronavirus, we need to find ways to talk about God as much as possible. I've been even praying and meditating a little bit more than normal because it sounds like we have a lot going on. And so I'm going to pray or ask someone to pray in a minute here. But first, I want to check on everybody, and if they know of, for themselves or anybody else in our church community or anybody in the community that needs help or something that you can share with us. If you'll do that, I think it's important to do that.
I would like to share that, again, good evening, everyone. The foundation that I work for, Fund for Democratic Communities, is in the process, and I know that there is lots going on in the community. I can say this, the Greensboro community is focused on helping people. That is a lot of what is going on and what I've seen. Our foundation is about establishing a mutual aid fund. And the difference in mutual aid is that it's about people helping people and feeling very much a part of the solution, as opposed to being in a position of just taking charity, which gives one a different feeling, I think, than being a part of helping everyone, including yourself. So it's not, all of the kinks aren't out of it yet, but we're partnering with the YWCA and the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro. And we'll hopefully be soliciting more funds, but there will be that effort. And unlike a lot of other support mechanisms that are in place, this one will be about helping individuals if it's individuals that need some assistance. We will be giving the money to the YWCA, and the YWCA will be about taking those requests for support and finding a way to get that money to individuals. There is also a virus relief fund, which is being run by the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro and the United Way. Very similar to the Tornado Relief Fund. Those two organizations were primarily getting that effort off the ground and established. So they right now have $800,000. The application process is very simple. It's on the United Way website. Not very many questions. And every Monday, that is the deadline. By the end of the week, decisions will be made about applications that were received on Monday. And this process will continue until they don't have any more money. Whichever lasts the longest, the money or the epidemic place we're in. So I have those two efforts that are afoot in the community.
Oh, very good, very
That's
good.
great.
So if you can make donations to any of those, that would be helpful.
Yes.
Please consider
Okay.
doing, because I get that we're probably sliding into the time where that's what's going to we're gonna need, and we also don't want to forget that those in poverty or those at the margins are probably triple, double, quadruple impacted by this than, you know, people like us who have a home and who have material things. Even if we might lose our jobs, we still may have something. So there are those people who have jobs and who may lose it because of this. And then there are those people who are already in dire straits. And so if we can give to any of those things, and we may decide on how to, and maybe in the works already about how the church will respond. I know that we're still doing a message in a meal, which is good. I was glad to see that. But there may be other ways that we can respond as a church also. So anybody else have anything they want to share? And I was talking, I think I mentioned this to Paula Graves. I said we have to also encourage everybody to pay their tithes and offerings.
Yeah.
Even though we're not coming to church, I said if we don't pay any tithes and offerings, we may not have any church when all of this
Come back to.
go.
That's right.
Exactly.
You know, so we have to be careful of that. Even Zoom costs money, so
Yes.
so we have to think about encouraging people to keep paying something so that we can still have our church community when it's time to come back. Because I have been busy a couple of weeks before this, so I hadn't been able to do it. But when I was gonna be able to come back to church, then this happened. So
Right.
all right. So is there anyone who would like to pray? If not, I will. But if there's someone else who'd like to pray us in, I would appreciate that. Okay.
I'll pray us in
Okay, thank you.
after we all sat and looked at each other.
I was just
We're so bad about this. But it's all good. Gracious God, we love you, we adore you. We thank you for this day, and we thank you for all of the things that you are doing in our lives right now. We know it's a difficult time for everyone, but we always know that you are there for us. We ask that you continue to watch over this country, watch over our leaders, deposit into them the right things to focus on so that we can address this demon that is running rampant in our country. We are excited about those who are on this Bible study Zoom experience. I know that you have imparted in Chanel some words for us to consider, to think about, to pray about, to carry with us through the week until we come back next week. And we are excited about being together, even if it's just for an hour, because we know that we're going to get a little bit of your wisdom during this time. So as we begin this Bible study, deposit in us, open up our hearts, open up our minds, let us be willing vessels for your word. And at the end of this day, we will always give you the glory and the honor and the praise. Amen.
Amen.
And thank you. And so we're going to get started. So please pray for me as we go through this. I'll talk to you a little bit about why I decided to do this. And I call myself, I don't know what I was spelling. I think I was going to start with saying armchair biblical scholar, and then it was supposed to be amateur biblical scholar. Nonetheless, it means I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just hoping that it comes out right. But if you have any questions, I just like to study the Bible and get some historical context behind some of the things. And so as we approach this Bible study, nobody's an expert. Um, we all are studying together. If you have something to add or change or correct or any of that, feel free to do that. And I can offer what resources I have to continue on with the Bible study. So if you're on the phone, you probably cannot see the slides, I guess. I don't know how many people are on the phone.
Me.
Are you on the phone, Ina?
No, I can see your slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there may be people who can't see the slides, and I apologize for that. I can send them out. I just didn't know who was going to join us. I can send the slides out to you so you'll have those. Okay.
Okay.
So this came about because every time we go into Lent, we hear multiple calls for us to fast. And I always get something in my heart that says, and I don't know if somebody maybe would mute. I hear somebody talking, but I'm not sure if they're so maybe mute unless you're ready to talk, and then unmute when you're, and I'll do the same. But I started to think a lot of times we ask people to fast and we encourage fasting, and sometimes we even do community or communal fast, and we don't, or corporate fast. But I'm not sure that people understand why and the impact of fasting. And so I was reading about fasting for Lent and came upon this Bible study that said, you know, Jesus didn't ask the disciples to fast. And in fact, he asked them, he said particularly, it's not time for them to fast yet, kind of saying, when I'm gone, they're going to be fasting. But right now is not the time. And I thought that was important because a lot of times we see these days between the disciples and Jesus as days in which they are preparing themselves to do the work that he has them to, that he needs them to do. And so if that's the case, and if fasting is important, you would think that he would be showing them how to fast. Well, maybe he is showing them that, but he doesn't ask them that. So I wanted to talk about that because I think it might help us reposition not only fasting, but all the things we do that lead us to Easter Sunday, right? And thereafter to the death of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus. So that's how I kind of got here. So the whole kind of background of the Bible study is not really just about fasting, but it's about all of the things that we might do as we appeal to God to be in our lives and to direct us. So I wanted to give you some significance about why fasting is even an option or something that we talk about. Jesus is fasting because it is a part of the Jewish tradition, right? There are many times in the Old Testament that Jews in their stories say that they went for a period of fasting. So one of the things that we want to point to, and we don't have a lot of time tonight, but I wanted to talk about, is where do we see fasting in the Bible at all? Sometimes fasting is about mourning, and so you'll see that in 2 Samuel. Something happens to someone, to a community, there's a death of someone, and as a result of that death, they mourn the passing of that person, and so they go into a period of fasting. Sometimes fasting is about acts of piety to show, kind of reconcile, kind of our, the way we think about ourselves and how we relate to God. In some ways, I look at it as kind of showing, not being too much of yourself. Don't think, not to think too highly of yourself. And so, you know, we know that priests and nuns, for example, sometimes they take a vow to piety, to have this lifestyle where they don't indulge in things that are so self-absorbed, but they just show that they don't think more than themselves than they ought to. So we see that happening. Also, fasting can be about dedication, and showing our dedication to things. So you see that in First Kings. A Day of Atonement has fastings around the Day of Atonement where we are forgive others and what they do, and then we are forgiven. So there is fasting around there. But then we often see fasting being around revelation and vision. When individuals want to know more about what God wants them to do, how they want to proceed, they may have a time of fasting. And so we know that of Elijah, and First King 19 has some verses related to that. Let me see, I'm gonna have to move everybody's picture around so I can see. Yeah, it says, and the angel of the Lord came again the second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. And he arose and did eat and drink and went to the strength of that meat 40 days and 40 nights into Hiram, the mount of God. So this section, around this section, is where Elijah is seeking guidance about his next move and what he should do. Okay, so it is one of the fast of Elijah is one of the prominent places where they talk about fasting in the Bible. And in fact, some of what we see Jesus going through when he does his 40 days and 40 nights is similar to what we see him talking about in terms of what Elijah did. And so I think that's important. That idea of fasting so that we can get some kind of revelation for God. And so let me be quiet for a minute and ask if there's anybody who wants to talk about their experience in fasting and what you might have, if you don't mind sharing, gotten from that, or how it might have helped you. And does it compare to any of the ways that we talked about fasting here? And I'll go back. If anybody wants to just talk about how did you maybe see fasting in when you maybe practice it? So y'all all may be like me because
I was about to share. I was muted though.
okay.
Well, I did fast, and I gave up something that I love, which is coffee, that I used to drink every morning and just couldn't, I thought, start a day without it. But I chose to give that up because I felt I needed to know if I could do it. So I think mine is about dedication.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that it says something when you make a decision to do something and you follow through. And you find that you make decisions about things and follow through all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But for this, and to choose that for myself during Lent, and I've been, it's not always been easy. So when there are times when it's not easy, and I weather through that because I pray. I pray that I'm able to prove to myself and to God that I can say that I'm going to do something. And there are, and mind you, there are much bigger things that could be done, but because I know how selfish I am about this this coffee thing. And so it's been good. It's been good for me, and it's revealed itself for me in various ways. The confidence, my love for God is clear. I feel very good about having made this decision and the reason I was making it. And now, short 2 weeks, I have been successful at doing this in the name of the Lord.
Very good. You know what? I'm not a coffee drinker, but I need to fast from this. That's my addiction. So we all know what you're talking about, even if you don't drink coffee. Yeah. But yeah, that is a big thing. That's not a little thing. That is a big thing that you're able to do. And I think I like how you talk about it, relating it to dedication and building something inside yourself, right?
Yes.
It builds something inside yourself. And traditionally, one of my sources said traditionally, fasting was about abstaining from food and drink. So that is the very traditional way that we look at fasting. And so I think what you did fits into that very much in terms of purpose and what you did. I think now people extend fasting to some other things or habits. Now, Mildred is good. Some of y'all might attempt fasting like me, which is not at all, or I give up something that is not probably something to give up. Like I'll give up, fried foods. Well, if fried foods was the only thing keeping me, out of the grace of God, then okay, but we know it's not, actually my food thing is sweets. I'm never fasting against sweets, because I've not challenged myself to do that. So sometimes we pick things that we know we can give up easily, and I don't know if that fits into the thing. I think it has to be like Mildred's coffee.
And Chanel, we had just got a new coffee maker.
That was just the devil.
Not too long before that, so.
But it does challenge you. But
it
does. And so one of the extensions that I think in common day that we use, and I think that I heard Pastor Moffitt talk about this a little bit when she was with us, is that you can fast in other ways. And there's also this concept that you can fast to give something.
Mm-hmm.
So you can say and there may be another term for that, but you're going to say, I'm not going to take away something, but I'm going to spend time doing a Bible study every morning, or something like that. So that's another way
Right.
that people could talk about it. Anybody else want to talk about their fasting?
I've tried fasting a couple of times. It's interesting. I didn't quite understand dedication, but it's actually a combination of dedication and revelation and vision. And I've fasted. The one thing I would fast from, try every year, was procrastination. And I think the last time I did it, I added it to my fast last year when we did the vegan fast. I think something finally clicked in, because I put off and put off and put off, and I started hearing myself over the past year just saying, stop putting it off and doing it. So something has finally clicked in, because I tell you, I think I've done procrastination for at least 6 or 7 years. And then the other thing was shopping at a particular place. And that was interesting that was such a challenge for me. But I realized my addiction to that place. And but what's been interesting is that every year around February, I don't have the desire to shop there. So I at least give my credit card a break for 2 months
Right.
out of the year. But it's interesting. I don't have the desire to shop. So and it's not only there, but it's everywhere. So it's an interesting thing, and I didn't realize that till last year, because that was also something that I've done for the last 4 years. Those two things to try to address. So I didn't really, when you asked the question, I had to reflect back, remembering that those were two things that have worked for me. But I'm fascinated by folks who fast for revelation of vision, because that's what I always thought fasting was the primary purpose. That was what it was for.
Yeah.
And I haven't gotten to that. It's probably my level of commitment and to being still long enough to hear something.
Yeah, I think if God is counting on me to fast to get a vision, we but I need to challenge myself. See, I need to challenge myself. I do want to read this verse, 1 Kings 12, 27 through 29. It says, if this people continues to go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, the heart of this people will turn again to their master. Okay, so in the dedication piece, I think that it's seeking to talk about wherever you spend your time focused on, that's where you're going to turn to. So I can see in the ways that you ladies are talking about spending your time focusing on something will turn you back to where you think you need to be. And it puts things in perspective, right? It put the coffee in perspective. It put the spending in perspective. And once you leave that period of fasting, maybe it kind of gets you geared back to make that a practice in your life. Not that you won't ever drink coffee again, or not that you won't ever shop again, but you put it in its place. I don't know if you would consider this a fast, but when I first had to, so the people don't know the story of my hair, I kind of had to go to locks because I was doing, I was spending lots of money, putting a lot of relaxer on my hair, doing all of this stuff. It was killing my hair, but I still wanted it. And I went to a dermatologist and he said, if you want your hair, you'll stop doing all that stuff. And so that's kind of when I went on this natural phase. But people will tell you, anybody who's grown locks will tell you that there is a sense of fasting that is there because you are going to look crazy. And you're going to look like you've never looked before. And it helps you to realize kind of where God places your ideologies about yourself and these vain things that you place your beauty and who you are on. And so the one of acts of piety, I think, goes with that too. The acts of piety and dedication, you may have something like that. And so I think fasting, though, is a purposeful going into something to make a change. And so you maybe can think of fasting in broader ways. And the only thing that I can really assimilate it with for myself is when I stuck to locking my hair and going natural. That process of questioning who I was and what I was supposed to be doing, I think is one of the main ingredients of fasting. Okay. So, but I'm going to tell you that I think that Jesus Christ complicates fasting for us, right? So even though it's a part of his tradition, he complicates fasting a little bit. Here are some additional references to it. Fasting is seen as at mitzvah, which mitzvah is a watchtower or a place where there was looking out. It was used when people were facing something bad. So facing the Philistine threat in 1 Samuel, you talk about that. Saul even asked those who were fighting with him, his militia, to fast, to get ready for that. So a part of it can be the visioning piece, but a part of it, I think sometimes people fast to get stronger or to prepare to go on to the next thing. So that may be where the corporate fast fits in. So what is Jesus's message about fasting then in these verses that were important here? So as we talk about this, we're going to go back to the synoptic verses, the chapters of the Bible, and mainly we're going to talk about three important books of the Bible: Matthew, and what we know about this chapter in the Bible is that we find out that Matthew is actually Levi, and that becomes important to the story that we're going to tell. But the story according to Matthew, we're not sure about with any of these who actually did the writing, but remember that Matthew was a tax collector. So we're hearing, I think that helps to complicate the story about fasting a little bit. He was the tax collector who ended up being a disciple of Jesus. And then we look at the other two books, Mark and Luke, and both of those stories are told by people who probably were not who did not physically spend time with Jesus, but were around other people who did, or who maybe they were doing some work. So Mark was actually an interpreter. And he was writing the words of others who kind of knew what happened. And Luke, we call him the beloved physician. Each of the roles that these individuals play have something to do with what you might see in the text, okay? So what I have here is a comparison about how the verses might look different as they tell this story about Jesus talking about fasting. So Matthew 9:14 says that then John's disciples came and asked him, "How is it that we and the Pharisees fast often, what your disciples do not?" And so in a minute, I'm going to have somebody read those verses from Matthew so that we can get the full story of what we're talking about here. But that is what Matthew said. Matthew was actually there. Jesus actually knew Matthew. We know that his name was Levi. Okay. Mark 2:18 says, "Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. And some people came and asked Jesus, 'How is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not?'" So we see a little bit of a difference there. And then Luke 5:33 says, "They said to him, 'John's disciples often fast and pray, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours go on eating and drinking.'" I would like for somebody, whoever wants to take a stab at it, just with these three verses, what do you notice is the difference?
Actually, I don't see a difference.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
when I read the scriptures, that's the first thing I realized. I said, these scriptures they're exactly the same. I mean, there is a slight bit of wording difference, but the meaning is exactly the same.
Okay. Okay. So Mildred says that they are pretty much the same story. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else?
That was sort of me too.
Okay.
When I read them, I got same thing. You know, I'm going back trying to look at it now when you presented these their roles or in terms of being Matthew, of course, being the tax collector, and I was trying to see if there was some relationship to who they were, what they were about, and how they said it. And I'm still not. I'm coming up with a blank right now.
Okay. Anybody else? Can we have more and one more who maybe see something? So they are the same in some ways, but in one way that is very interesting, it is about who actually asked the questions of Jesus, right? Who was bold enough to ask the questions of Jesus? And Matthew's story being one who was there, and remember that he is a tax collector. And he is at this place and he sees what's happening. And what he says is that John's disciples are the ones who ask him. He does not include the Pharisees. He says that John's disciples come up and ask him. Now, not John the Baptist, right? John the Baptist himself isn't asking, but his disciples are asking, right? And he says, and Matthew is kind of saying it's not the Pharisees that are asking in particular, whereas Mark and Luke, who are actually recording this from other sources, they start to tell a different story. Mark says that it's John's disciples and the Pharisees are fasting, and then some people came up and asked, and they don't really know who they were, but some people came up and asked Jesus. And then Luke says that that he says that John's disciples often fast and pray, and so do the disciples, but yours goes on and they eat. And somebody said that to him, right? So for this, I kind of wanted to lean on, although I think the other two are important, I think that hearing it from Matthew here gives us more context to how it really looked, and he was there. Why is why is Matthew there? Matthew, whose name is really Levi, is a tax collector. And so one of my sources says the following: one of Jesus' original disciples, named in all of the list of the 12, okay? In their accounts of his call to become a disciple, Mark and Luke actually give his name as Levi. His being a tax collector and the similarity to the details of the calling make the identification of Matthew with Levi virtually certain. Mark accounts list him as the son of Alphaeus, which would seem to identify him as the brother of James, but we're not talking about the James, son of Zebedee, that we later know that Christ meets. All three synoptic accounts of Matthew and Matthew/Levi's calling are followed shortly by accounts of Jesus attending a reception with many taxpayers and sinners present. Only Luke clearly identifies the home as being the home of Levi. So it's important here of the story that Matthew is telling, because Matthew is probably Levi and the event happens at his house. He is a tax collector who invites Jesus into his home to have a celebration. So once you look at that, the question about fasting is a little bit different. The question about fasting here is questioning what Jesus is doing. Jesus, so this is, kind of how we find it. Jesus is where he's not supposed to be, having dinner with other people. And here are the Pharisees, and here are the followers of John, and they are asking questions about why are you here? And why don't you, it's not just about fasting, it's why don't you follow the customs that everybody else is following? Okay. Does anybody have a question about that? Why I think that's important, or thinking about that? Because it helps build for some future stuff that we're gonna do. So if you were to take a note, you would say, maybe we'll follow in this Bible study Matthew's words. We may lean on Mark and Luke a little bit, but Matthew's words, because it is at his house while he's making the transition from being a tax collector to a disciple. And one of them, I believe it is Mark, who says that in essence, Levi gives up everything to follow Christ. And that is important. One source said that is important because he was a lucrative tax collector. So it wasn't he was just kind of this poor person who didn't have much to do and said, well, I might as well follow Christ. Matthew is a person who gives up everything, things that are working well. He could not only tax the people who lived in the city, this source says, but he could tax passersby who were traveling for commerce. He could even tax them. And he leaves it all alone to follow Jesus. This thing is happening at his home, and the Pharisees and John's disciples show up to kind of talk about what's happening. So I'm going to stop to see if there are any questions there. Do you see a difference now, I guess, in the verses?
I'm picking it up. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I guess if I were to, in terms of how I'm studying it, and you might study it different, and that is okay. Mark and Luke can add context to what Matthew actually experienced, is what I'm gonna say, okay? So let's take a little short break and say, could somebody read Matthew then 9:14 through 17, so we all make sure we know what we're talking about.
Matthew what? 9?
14 through 17.
14 through 17. 14. Then John's disciples came and asked him, how is it that we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? Jesus answered, how can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them? The time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. Then they will fast. No one sews a patch of an unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch will be pulled away from the garment, making the tear worse. Neither do men pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved.
Very good. Thank you so much. So that's Miss Meacham. Who was that?
Yes.
Yes, I hear your voice. Thank you so much. So let's think about this a minute. So that is the story that we're talking about here. So it's not just a story of fasting, which by the end of this Bible study will lead us to the resurrection and past the resurrection, but it is about the role that Jesus starts to play in the lives of people that he's actually calling. And so I do want to give you some context. I did have this video that I would have shown, but we're not going to have enough time. But if you want to get a little video entertainment, here's the story of John the Baptist. What I don't want you to assume is that John the Baptist was along with these followers asking these questions. He was not. John the Baptist has a very early on awareness of who Jesus is. And literally, you're going to see that in this video. John the Baptist is baptizing people, and he's telling people eventually somebody's going to come. And some literations of that say he looks up and Jesus is there and he knows who Jesus is, right? And so there's something special about John the Baptist. In my reading of him, one of the things that we have to know is that John the Baptist does not actually get killed because of his work talking about the Messiah and talking about doing following Jesus. He doesn't get killed that way. The way he gets killed is because I don't know who I need to mute, but somebody needs to mute. Because he actually questioned the king's wife at the time, one of the leader's wives. And because of his questioning of her, which is another Bible study, he is killed. He gets his head chopped up and served on a platter. But what we do know about it is John the Baptist is killed for the same reason that Jesus is killed in some ways, if we just look at the physical element of it. And it's because they are challenging the ways in which ordinary society is operating, and they are challenging injustice. So what Jesus is doing here in this conversation about fasting is that he's challenging ordinary society and the way that people operate. And he's using fasting as a context on which to do that. So, one of the things we know about John the Baptist is that he actually baptized Jesus. I have a question for you. What is the significance of Jesus asking him, and I'm going to just mute everybody. What is the significance of Jesus asking him to baptize him? And then why does it matter? Why does it matter?
And walls making room for new memories. Protect the pure joy of home with Terminix.
I'm going to try to get somebody to mute.
Your home with our all-new On-Guard termite protection system. Always backed by the Terminix promise to keep your home strong for all the love.
I don't think I can mute because I'm actually not the host. But
what if we made the sheets app faster? Yes, and what if you could pay with your phone at the register?
You're literally talking about the upgraded.
Is that
you just make the request?
I think it's a telephone number. Can everybody make sure you're muted so we can't hear you?
Checkout. Sheet run and done.
Hey everybody, these guys haven't heard about the upgrade.
Somebody watching TV. You listening to me?
You know we talk this way. Chocolate.
I'm sorry. Let me claim the host. Oh, I don't have a thing, so I can't do that.
Everyone's standing like this, so
I just wanted to take that as an aside question. Can everybody check their phones and make sure they've muted?
Maybe they've stepped away because everybody is hearing that. So I would expect they hear it too.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of crazy, you know? And I don't have the control, so I can't do anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is, however, an S.
Okay. I'm sorry, guys. So one of the things that happens in the scene with John the Baptist is that Jesus asked him to baptize him. He says, no, this is your time. You keep doing, he says, keep doing what you're doing, it says in the passage. So what is the significance of him getting John the Baptist to baptize him? And would you have been willing to baptize him? Because John the Baptist really doesn't want to do it, actually. If Jesus came today and said, will you baptize me, what would you do? Would anybody feel intimidated?
Oh,
Would
yeah.
feel unworthy.
That's what, yes, that's what I was going to say. That I would mess it up.
Yes, the one baptism you don't want to mess up.
Thank you. Keep him down too long.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah, don't do that. Yeah. So a part of that is fulfilling the prophecy. But another piece of that I can see for myself is that God is troubling these institutional things that we do. John the Baptist is a very good person, but a part of his training is this, he's a part of one of the most religious sects of Jews, and it's about things are in a proper place. So John the Baptist in his very human self says, as a human, I know I'm not worthy of you. So I don't know that I should baptize you. You have all the power. And Jesus is troubling that. He's saying, wait a minute, you have power too. And I want you to, see that power. He does it another time when he talks about the washing of feet, which we often do during this period of Lent. Jesus washed the feet of the disciples. How many of you would let Jesus wash your feet? I can't even let the people at the church wash my feet.
Yeah.
But if Jesus was here today, would you let him wash your feet? I wonder. But our inability to let Jesus wash our feet is something, speaks something to our ability to be very intimate with Jesus. And a part of what Jesus is trying to get these disciples to do along this road that he knows is not going to end in this world very good for him is that he's trying to increase their intimacy with him. And in some ways, in this relationship that he's talking about, if we go back to this passage in Matthew 9:14 through 17, he's taking a very protective role over the disciples. And he's saying, in essence, this is not time for them to be doing that kind of mourning. You look at all the reasons to fast. This isn't the time for them to be doing that, because does the bridegroom fast when the groom is there? He's saying, no, this is the time for them to be intimate with me. There will be a time when they will need fasting, is what he's saying. And we're going to talk about that in another Bible study. So any reactions to that before we go on? So I think it's a question of intimacy.
What are you doing?
I also was thinking that it was a little bit about surrendering, because when you talked about how you felt, and that was my initial reaction to having someone wash my feet at church, and I realized I had to get over it, so to speak, because of the significance of it. So I was thinking surrendering also.
Yeah, surrendering also, yeah. I think that's a part of the intimacy, right? When you have an intimate relationship with somebody, right? There's a surrendering of both people in the relationship.
Yeah.
What about being a servant, Chanel? That's a sign of being a servant.
That I'm willing to serve, that those people who are at the highest place serving those people who are beneath them. is another way of looking at that. And of course, that's how we get servant leadership, right? Is that we change the roles of it. So I do think Jesus is in this passage trying to do something different than just look at the process of Lent. And so what I would say is Lent is something different than just the process. And if we get only the process and not what it's intended to do, we may miss out on the intimacy of Christ. So a part of this description of the Bible study says is that it's preparing our heart for Holy Week and the blessings of the resurrection. A part of that is that how can we, between now and Holy Week and going into Resurrection Sunday, what are all the things that we might be doing, whether they include fasting or not, that help us increase our intimacy with Jesus? I want you to take a minute and breathe that in. How can in these next weeks can you increase your intimacy with Jesus? So here in this slide, I want to talk a little bit about the trouble with these disciples. So who are the disciples that were with John the Baptist? They actually believed that John the Baptist was the Messiah. And even though he's telling them that somebody else is coming, remember the Jewish culture at the time is waiting for a Messiah to come. And the people who are following John the Baptist in some ways think that, hey, maybe you really are that person. Now we know, if we even look at Jewish culture today, we would say that even if they believe in the person Jesus of Nazareth, they would still are saying, you know, the Messiah hasn't come. One of the departures of our Christian experience from the Davidic, you know, other traditions under that, you know, the Abrahamic faith is that we say decidedly that there's a place where the Messiah does come, and that is in Jesus Christ, right? In some ways, when we see, it's important that we see that these disciples, who probably disciples of John, are really good people. It's important to point them out here, and they're never really talked about after this. But we see them as rivals to Jesus, disciples of Jesus. And in fact, there are some comparisons later on about what disciples should be doing, but never any questioning from them after this point. So we see that John the Baptist disciples are doing some things, and the question is, why don't Jesus' disciples do that? Because they're supposed to be following him and assisting him, right? So what is going on that even if John the Baptist doesn't want them to follow him in that way or see themselves as rivals, what makes them become rivals is important. And I think that's important to why Jesus does many of the things that he does, because I think he's saying something different, that we can follow the process or we can gain the intimacy. And sometimes we're so busy following the process, which I think these disciples of John the Baptist are doing, that they forget the intimacy. How do you know they're forgetting the intimacy? Because they're asking these very questions that if they were really following John the Baptist, they wouldn't be asking. How do we know that? Because when John the Baptist sees Jesus, the first moment, he says, "This is who you are. You are the Messiah." So even though their leader is telling them that, they aren't willing to go along with it, right? So they participate along with the Pharisees, possibly according to the story of Levi/Matthew, in questioning who Jesus was as the Messiah.
But we're ready to get your project started today.
So here we go with the setup, and you've seen the setup. We don't have long, but I'm going to go there. There are some people that you need to think about as we talk about this story. One, we're in the house of Levi. This is Matthew's house. He is a tax collector, and there are some important people who are there. he's a tax collector, so his tax collector friends are probably there. Jesus doesn't yet have all of his disciples with him yet. This is early on, so it's probably Jesus and a few people that were with him, but not all of the followers that he would eventually end up with. And then there are these Pharisees, and then there are these followers of John the Baptist. That's a wild party if we think about who was there. One of the things that you might imagine is to talk about what would have been the discussion. You probably saw the people if you were there, and there is one artist who's tried to, I think from the 15th century, who tried to kind of do a portrait of this. But you can imagine that all these people are in the room and they are whispering about Jesus and some of his disciples that he's not telling to do what they think is customary to do in the Jewish faith. And then there's this dialogue. And so we've already talked about the significance of Matthew and it being at his house and what this feast is about and what Matthew does. So that is important to the story. And so there is some, and we're going to get into this next class, time, but there is some historical, social, and cultural meaning of the story. And that is what we really need to start thinking about as we go through this study. What does it mean to not be fasting, but what does it mean to talk about fasting? What does it mean to talk about fasting? And what are the implications for people who are asking the questions, even in the day of Jesus, and for us now? Meaning, should we be asking ourselves, what are the reasons for our fast? Really. And we should not think so badly of the followers of John the Baptist or of the Pharisees, because at least they're willing to ask these very critical questions about fasting. Because it's through that they probably really learn the significance of what fasting means. And so we're going to stop at this point. Jesus goes on into doing 4 parables after that question is asked. Some of the research says that although we often go into all 4 parables, for this idea of fasting, we should stop at the first one. And so for our next Bible study that's going to be here at 7:30 next Wednesday, I want you to think about what does it mean when we get to verse, I guess it's in the second part of verse 15, where it says, the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and they will fast. And no one sews a piece of unshrunken cloth on an old cloak, for the patches pull away from the cloak, and the worst tear is made. Neither is new wine poured into old wine skins. Otherwise, the skin bursts, and the wine is spilled, and the skins are destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved. I want you to think about next week. What does that mean in terms of what Jesus is preparing the disciples to do and about the developing of the intimacy that is important in their relationship? What does that parable mean to you? So that is your homework. I always give homework. That is your homework for next week, is to, now that we've kind of looked at what Matthew is really saying to us, what is this parable then asking us to do as we move on to the fast? So next week we're going to talk about that, and we're going to let it lead us into Jesus fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. All right, any questions?
Chanel, will we start at 6:30 next week? Okay.
Yeah, as far as I know, there's nothing else going on. I don't think we're having anything. I know that's next week is Holy Week.
Yeah.
And I did ask if there was anything going on. And so I guess there's nothing we can do because of our situation. So I'm gonna start at 6:30 if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And we'll go from 6:30 to 7:30. I'm running over now, but I'm really gonna try to hold to that because I don't want people to get weary of the Bible study. But any other questions? So if you've gotten this little announcement, our topic next week is where were the disciples when Jesus was fasting? Where were they? You would think they would be there maybe, but they were not there. So where were the disciples when Jesus was fasting is our topic. And what we're reading is Mark 1:13, Matthew 4:1-11, and Luke 4:1-13. And if you'll notice that Mark takes front seat here.
Say that again.
We're going to take Mark, he's going to take front seat next
Oh,
week.
front seat. Okay.
Yeah, he's going to sit in the shotgun with us. So we're going to lead from that. So those are two things you may want to look over to prepare for that remaining verse in Matthew this week, and then those three verses. I'm going to quickly go ahead and play us out if there are no more questions. Okay. Lord, I thank you for this Bible study and just the perfect way in which you made it happen. Sometimes we think, Lord, that things are not perfect because we're experiencing them in a way that we don't know, but we know that everything that you do, you can make it perfect. And just as you're making this Bible study perfect in the way that you'd like it to be, you'll make our hearts and our souls perfect. Remember that we are always perfecting, trying to reach the goals that represent your name. And so this week, as we move forward, as we move closer to Holy Week, Lord, be with us, guide us, protect us, but also challenge us to increase our intimacy with you, challenge us to increase our intimacy with other people in our midst in a good way, in an appropriate way, challenge us to see about our brothers and sisters who are in need in our community in a different way, challenge us as we grow closer and move closer to the experience of the cross. Lord, also help us to mind our rules of safety and be safe distances from other people. Sometimes we're going to forget, Lord, but when we see somebody, ask us, are you 6 feet away? Ask us, did we wash our hands? Ask us, did we clean off of that surface? Ask us, do we really have to go and run that errand? We want to save lives, Jesus, and we know that more people are going to experience loss. And so we want to do everything we can to be healthy, sane, and whole. In the name of Jesus Christ, who always heals us. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Thank you, Chanel.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good evening,
Thank you.
everyone.
Yeah, have a good one.
You too.
So I went on eBay and I said, I will go to wherever the highest bidder wants me to go. I'll donate the money. And when people talked about it, they said I was selling my soul, which I found out I can't actually do because eBay says that's a body part. But it was a fascinating experience. Okay.
Leanne Gonzalez-Singer, legal secretary from New York, also a little bit of a performer. You and your husband did what with puppets?
Well, my husband and I used to be opera singers. We met on a gig, and at our children's school benefit talent show, we performed Rossini's cat duet using cat puppets.
Wow. Now, you're an opera singer, soprano, mezzo-soprano? Mezzo. My favorite role is the mezzo role. Benevento. Rossini. Okay, let's get back into this one. Cammie has command of the board at the moment.
Potent potable analogies for 1,000?
Vodka is to Russia as soju is to this country. Cammie.
What is